أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله العزيز الوهاب غافر الذنب وقابل التوب شديد العقاب والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أما بعد فيا أيها الشباب السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We praise Him, the Almighty, the bestower, the forgiver of sin, the acceptor of repentance, and the one who is stern in retribution and holding to account. Thereafter to proceed, our dear listeners, brothers and sisters, we are on episode 12 of our Friday Shutdown series brought to you by the Muslim Youth Network. We have a very special guest today. Without any further delay, I will introduce our brother Muhammad Rabbani. Assalamu alaikum. Just see, check your mashallah. How are you doing? So a warm welcome to you on our Friday Shutdown today. Myself, as you know, I'm in Doha in Qatar, so it's literally a warm, very hot day for us. I think around 39 degrees here, alhamdulillah. So I'm going to begin, obviously our topic and theme today is divine justice. So if I could ask you first of all, you are currently the International Director at CAGE, right? Yeah. So if I can ask you a bit more about your role,
sure.
And some of the work that CAGE does for our audience. Some people may know about CAGE already and some may not. And one thing I've really wanted to highlight is the three words that's there on underneath the logo of CAGE, which is witness, empower, and justice. If you can expand on those as well, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala. Well, again, assalamu alaikum to yourself, Omar, and everybody who's watching, listening. Alhamdulillah, we are blessed to be part of this gathering. Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure and an honor for me to be addressing this audience. MYN is a special organization to me. In fact, much of my youth was spent with MYN when I was maybe 16, 17, 18, or all the way up till, I don't know, several years. So alhamdulillah, it's really nice to be here speaking to the brothers. So a little bit about CAGE. CAGE is an organization which is fundamentally premised on one idea, one value which we believe is critical, vital, especially for Muslims, and that is the value of justice. And we, in the pursuit of justice, we concentrate in a particular arena, a particular issue or area, set of issues. And that's what we loosely call the war on terror. The war on terror was launched in 2001, and it's been almost 20 years now. It was a global war that spanned not just military invasions, occupations across the Muslim world and beyond. It saw the launch of something called drone warfare, huge military infrastructure all across the world. But also the war on terror is fought in countries like the UK and Europe and other countries on the domestic front through a whole series of legislation, policies, and powers that the government has created in the name of fighting terrorism. So what CAGE does is tries to draw attention to this and tries to push back and challenge against the narratives, the laws, the policies that have been created in the name of fighting terrorism. That's in a nutshell. A quick word on the three words that you mentioned, witness, empower, and justice. These are very important, meaningful values which actually describe the work and underpin most of the work of CAGE throughout. Both our the casework we do, the community engagement we do, and also the public narrative work that we do. Witness is about recording testimony and making sure that we act as witnesses to truth and justice. Witnesses in the sense that we are recording and documenting the crimes and horrors that are happening today against the oppressed and vulnerable. And these will be, just as we are recording, the angels are recording, and on the day of accounting, they will be witnessing. So that encompasses our entire concept of witnessing to truth and justice. The second concept of empowerment is to try and, because the war on terror is a comprehensive concerted plan to fracture the Muslim self-belief and identity, fracture the Muslim identity, create division within Muslim communities, to create fear across Muslim communities. So our work is about lifting that fear and empowering Muslim communities, particularly who have been at the receiving end of draconian laws and policies, as well as wars and invasion, to feel self-confidence, to feel strength and power. So, and the last bit about justice is I suppose what we will be expanding on today. It is the belief that actually there is a concept called justice, and there is a worldly aspect to it, and there is a akhir aspect to it, and every single person deserves to receive just and fair treatment, and especially the oppressed, those people who've been forcibly, their rights have been taken away from them. So Cage stands to actually promote their rights and their their right to access justice.
Jazakallah khair. So can you tell us a bit more about your role, what kind of things you may be involved in and currently working on?
Yeah, sure. I think, some of you, I don't know how familiar the brothers are, those who are watching. My specific role is I'm the managing director, so I've got oversight of the whole of Cage's work. If I was to divide it into sort of 3 areas, I'd say there's work that we've got a department that works with clients, that's individuals and families directly. Anybody who's been affected by the war against Islam, basically the war on, they call it the war on terrorism. We can unpack that inshallah a little bit if you want. Anybody who's been impacted by that, they could be people who are abroad or could be in the UK. They could be people who've been kidnapped and disappeared, or they could be people who've been stopped at the airport. They could be people who've been tortured in the past, or people who've been, their house has been raided, or a social services worker is trying to sort of harass a family under the guise of prevent, for example. So it's a whole range of different types of individuals that we support under casework. The second area of work is working directly with our community at large. Not necessarily people who've been, affected directly by war and terror, directly, but indirectly through the kind of the narratives, the climate, through the kind of structure of discrimination and oppression against Muslims. The Muslim community at large has been affected, has been traumatized. So that second aspect of our work is about educating the community, spreading the knowledge, giving them the intellectual tools, the legal tools as well, to understand their environment and to also find self-confidence. And the last area of work is about trying to influence and change the conversation about Muslims and about the whole discourse around security, terrorism, and the link, the link that has been manufactured between Islam and violence. And our job there is to try and unlink that, and using evidence, using real kind of facts to try and persuade people that actually this is a lie that has been fed by particular vested interests. So that's in summary the 3 kind of areas that we've work on.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Thank you for that. So let's go into a bit more on divine justice. How do we talk about this? Obviously from the Islamic perspective, but in an ungodly society, especially let's say in the Western world. How do we talk about the principles of divine justice? And if you can go into it in a bit more detail, inshallah.
Yeah. I think I suppose justice, first, if we talk about what is justice, maybe that might be helpful. To try and keep it simple, justice exists when every person, everyone has received their portion, or whatever is due to them, they've been given that. That's where justice exists. The opposite of justice is dhulm, injustice or oppression. And that's when whatever someone is due is deprived from them. So there's a aspect of justice that is understood by all people. We can call that universal justice. And then there's an aspect of justice that is not going to be understood by non-Muslims, but Muslims will recognize, and it will resonate with them, because Whereas non-Muslims will consider justice and come to the definition of justice through their own experience, trial and error, and of course, a lot of subjective input into the concept of justice. Muslims believe that justice is something that has been already defined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, the sustainer, the provider, the maker. He's already given us an idea of what is fair, what is just. So divine justice, therefore, is trying to make that link and connection between the concept of justice, that it is, it cannot really exist truly unless it originates from a source that is divine. Why? Because that means that concept of justice will be free from any bias, any preferential treatment. It will be free from any limitation, any imperfection. So when taken together, that's the idea of divine justice in a nutshell. Are you with us still, Amor?
Yes, yeah, I'm saying. Jazakallah khair, shukran. Okay, so what are the, would you say, key focuses at the moment when it comes to, let's talk about our youth audience in the UK, that we should be aware of, that we should be maybe perhaps get involved in? And if you could shed light on some of the things that's happening in the US. I mean, it started in the US, but you can see in such a globalized world, it's, things are happening in the UK now. I hear certain school names and statues being targeted, especially I grew up in a town not too far from Bristol, actually, where the, forgot the name of the person, the slave trader, that the statue was taken down there as well. So yeah, if you could touch a bit on that.
I think, there's a lot of stuff going on, isn't it, all the time. And right now there's a focus on, and it's been a long time coming and well overdue. There's a particular focus on the injustices that have been faced by Black people over centuries. And it's not like it happened the other day. It's been centuries of colonialism, slavery, and everything.
Yeah.
And that is a great injustice. So I think, but of course, there are so many injustices taking place in this world.
Can I just ask, if I just help set the scene on terms of justice and the issues going out there, a spectrum.
Yeah.
On one side of the spectrum, we have physical injustices caused by war, for example, in Syria, Yemen, and many other places. There's physical oppression on a people, for example, the Rohingya Muslims, the Uyghur Muslims in China, and the Palestinians and the Gazans in that region, and Yemen as well. We have injustice in terms of racism and institutional racism, which you can hopefully expand on as well, and an injustice or oppression on an individual, and not necessarily a whole community, but a person has faced something. And some of the cases that Cage work on as well. What do we do in terms of our approach to these? I mean, it's not within us to tackle all issues, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may question us on some of these where we did have ability. So if you can perhaps say, what should our approach be on that?
I think the starting point, Akhi, is to recognize that justice is an obligation and an absolute requirement of Iman. As soon as a Muslim, I'm talking to Muslims, isn't it? So we're coming at it from a very clear framework. And that framework is, our obligations are divinely ordained. And we have to meet a standard of belief and conduct that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already informed us about, right? So the first thing to say is that justice is one of the features of this deen, this revealed way. And it was the feature of all the prophetic stories that we read in the Quran. And certainly one of the key things that stood out about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his commitment to justice, and justice, just a couple more words on that. I mean, justice means to always speak truth, do the right thing, even if it's against yourself, even if it's against a material interest you have, even if it's against a family member. Always be with the right. Do give everybody their due that Allah has decided for them, even if it means it harms you or harms your team, your family, your colleagues, whatever. That's the commitment to justice that we need to have as Muslims. So that's the first thing, that we have to make a moral commitment as individuals. Okay, next thing is, how do we now manifest that? How do we actually practice that? So there's going to be naturally stages and spheres. So wherever individually we within our capacity, we have to do our utmost to implement justice. Now, so let's give some examples. Let's say, for example, in your family, let's say you've got, you're a young person, you've got siblings, you've got parents, and so on. Allah has already told us what is due to each of these people in your family. So the just thing to do there is to make sure that you give everybody their due. So parents, we know how much they're due. Like they're due our respect, our obedience. If they ask us something, you have to obey them, and so on. So this is included in the concept of justice. That if you do not give them what is their due, then you're being unjust. Right? Same with your brothers and sisters. Let's say now you're at university, or let's say you've got a bunch of friends, and one of the things that you are required to do as friends or brothers is to show loyalty, to look out for each other, to protect each other from harm, to wish good for each other. Now, if in your dealings, let's say one of your friends comes along and says that, let's say, I don't know, tries to undermine another member of your group, you became aware of it, and he offers you a proposal in which you will benefit. Let's say it's like to open up a business or something like that. You're going to abuse somebody else's right within your friends to open up that business. Maybe you're going to steal his idea, maybe you're going to steal his brand or something like that. Now, your commitment to justice should prevent you from going ahead with that proposal, even though you benefit. You see? So like that, it goes higher and higher. If you've got more authority, you have to implement justice under everybody who you have authority over, all the way until obviously the ruler of a land or a country has to implement justice, divine justice on all of his population. So if we, so I suppose in conclusion, what I'm trying to say is that every single Muslim needs to make a commitment that our belief isn't just ideas that we carry or stories that we tell. No, there is a moral standard. There are some ethics, and we stand against oppression, and we're always supporting the side of justice in everything that we do, in every sphere that we are involved in. Doesn't matter how small or large it is.
Yeah, shukran. So if we can use a practical example and something which is quite recent in the current affairs, I mean, what are your thoughts on the BLM movement and what they're seeking, and how should young Muslims are seeing this all over social media? They're saying this within their conversations, perhaps as well. Some might be in university, in joining certain societies. They have ability to campaign and do some activism around this, and some may be even involved politically, engaging with the community and that kind of thing. Would you say we need to be careful in how we approach it as Muslims, or is it free for go join any campaign and let's support them?
Yeah, I think firstly, Akhi, there's going to be two types of people, right? Some people, they look around, they see all of this going on, and it doesn't bother them. Okay, so we shouldn't be like those people. These people are people who are spectators, right? They see lots of wrongdoing, lots of injustice around them, but they're just observers. They're very self-centered. Their logic is, so long as it doesn't affect me, I don't care.
Yeah.
So that's totally wrong. Right? There is a famous story in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded some of the Muslims who came before Bani Israel that on Saturday, make sure you don't do any work. So in that case, they used to go fishing. But what they did, they tried to sort of circumvent the command. And what they did, on Friday, they set up some nets to catch the fish, and then they skip Saturday, and then they go and pick up the fish. So they tried to do something clever to get around Allah's command. So in the community, there was some people who noticed this, and they started to speak out and to tell those guys who set up the net, who were breaching the law, that stop it, don't do that. Now, there was another bunch of people in the community. They were saying to the ones who were speaking out, why bother? Like, why are you guys doing this for? You don't need to. What difference is it going to make, basically? Just leave them. They're doing the evil, they will get the evil, right? So Allah in the story narrates their response, the ones who actively tried to stop the wrongdoers, and he says about them, they gave a reason. They gave two reasons. They said, مَعْذِرَةً إِلَى رَبِّكُمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. So they said, perhaps the reason why we're intervening is maybe, firstly, on the Day of Judgment, we can offer an excuse to Allah, which reveals that if you've got the ability, you must speak. You must. You can't be a spectator. Okay. So their logic was, if we're resurrected, we can say to Allah that, we tried to tell him, i.e., we were not passively supporting them. We're not silent. And the second reason they gave is, perhaps the people, when we tell them, who knows, maybe they might take heed. Maybe they will return back to following Allah's command. Who knows? Okay. So similarly, our involvement, when we see all these things going around, you mentioned the struggle for racial justice occurring right now, the kind of uprising and the protests going on there. Similarly, we have to take a similar approach. We have to say that we cannot be spectators. That's number one. Number two, we have to do what is within our ability. Right? That's the second thing. Number three, we have to measure very, very carefully and make sure that whatever we do, it's something productive, it's something meaningful, it's something sensitive. Okay, it's not something that is being done out of like a knee-jerk reaction because it's a trend. Everybody's doing it, so I'm doing it.
Exactly, yeah.
The bandwagon going past, I'm going to jump on. No, our commitment to justice is deeper than that. Okay, so that's the third point. And the fourth point is, whatever intervention we do make and whatever contribution we do make to this cause, it's got to be in keeping with our values as Muslims. Okay, so of course we support justice for all people, whether they're Muslim or not. But the way we make that contribution cannot be antithetical to the values of Islam. Okay, i.e., it shouldn't be something that requires us to hide our identity or reject anything that Allah has already ordained us with, nor should it involve anything where we are endorsing something which Allah has prohibited. So with these 4 points together, we should get involved. We should support every single, oppressed people, whatever struggle that is, and there are many. So we can talk about like practically which ones and all those are more strategic and tactical questions. But the principle is we should support every people who are struggling for justice.
Okay. I'm really happy that you brought this example of Bani Israel. It's actually something I wanted to bring up as well. So mashallah, there's you say there's 3 groups, right? If you can just repeat those 3 groups and their approaches. And my question is, you feel free to name and shame, or today in the UK or in the people that we see who are maybe opposing or contributing to the injustice or allowing it, facilitating it, legitimizing it. Who and where are they at the moment? Those who are saying don't bother or it doesn't affect us, or actually no, we need to make steps, and who from the Muslim community or non-Muslim community maybe we should be cooperating with, forming alliances or support their work.
On the issue of racial justice, or do you mean more generally?
You could start with this one, but more generally as well, in terms of the general principle. I know it's quite it's specific, and like you said, it's tactical, the way you approach each one, but maybe some general principles for us to think about.
I think the groups, let's talk about the groups. So there's three, isn't it? There's the group that is actually doing the wrongdoing. So in the case of the story that I said from the Quran, they're not doing wrong against anybody else. They're breaching Allah's command. And that's another important thing before I forget. Our concept of justice doesn't only include the idea that you're harming somebody else. Our concept of justice, injustice, takes into account that one can actually harm themselves. So you can do dhulm to yourself. You do the dhulm to yourself by disobeying Allah's command, by committing sins. So you see, a non-Muslim won't understand that. A person who has a superficial connection to Islam won't understand that. Secular Muslims won't understand that. But if you look at the Islamic concept of justice, we are against dhulm of both types. People should be protected from doing dhulm against themselves. People should be protected from doing dhulm against others, meaning Allah's creation. So that's important because it distinguishes us from the non-Muslims who are fighting for justice from a purely materialistic perspective. Okay, the three groups. The first group is the one who was actively performing the wrongdoing. The second group is the group that was passively watching the wrongdoers, playing the spectator role, right? They had the ability to do something, to say something, but they didn't do anything. That's the second group. The third group is the group that was actively trying to do whatever they could within their power to stop the wrongdoers. Okay, it's a separate question. Did they manage to stop them? That's a separate question, because the issue is about ethics. What is the right thing to do? Okay, less about if you do that right thing, is it going to give you the result? Okay, again, here's something which creates a distinction between us and non-Muslims. Secular people. Secular people are willing to compromise their ethics in order to secure results. But Muslims, they have a clear moral framework. And in fact, one of the beliefs about justice we have is, it's not all here in this world. Maybe some of the oppressed people will never see justice in this world, but we don't, that's not like a deal breaker for us. We will fight injustice with all our effort and energy, but in the end, justice may not be served in this world. There is an accounting coming. Yeah. So to summarize this, we've got those three groups, right? So the people who are passively watching the wrongdoing, see the Quran actually tells the story and says that both of them were punished. The ones who were actively doing wrong, the ones who had the ability to stop the wrongdoing, but they were passively supporting. Both of them were punished, right? So what that makes clear is that, as a Muslim, you don't have a choice to be a spectator. The only exception to that is when you don't have the ability, right? And now, of course, the famous hadith, which we'll just say here, where the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever sees a munkar, a wrong, clear-cut wrong happening, then let him change it with his hand. So there's like a push. You have to try and change the situation practically. If you are unable to, then let him change it with his tongue, meaning speaking. Speak out at least. If you are unable to, then let him hate it in his heart. Okay? So the link here is that there is a connection between how much you can do and what's expected of you. So if you have the ability to do more, then you should do more. If you are totally like you don't have the ability, you're stuck somewhere, or it's a life or death situation, all right, then the obligation is lifted. But in your heart, you need to still reject that evil, and in your mind, you have to believe very strongly that if I had the ability, I would do something. Okay, so so those were the three groups you wanted to talk about, right? So they're going to always be present in every society. Every single community, they will have these three groups. Within this racial struggle amongst the Black community, the African American struggle, there are these three groups. There is one group which is actively fighting the oppressors who have been responsible for slavery and literally imprisoning huge portions of the Black population, police brutality and murder and killing on the streets. So there's one group that is actively fighting them. There's another group that is dissuading the first group and saying, let's stop this. Let's actually talk. Let's negotiate. And why don't we join the police? Why don't we, that's the way to actually solve it. And then there's another group who are directly doing the evil. So they are black people as well. But they are involved in carrying out the killings, right? They are actually involved in endorsing practically and often actually present there, killing and part of the prison system, part of the legal system, carrying out the oppression. In the Muslim community, same thing. You're going to find a group of people who are actively participating in the evil and the injustice. They might have Muslim names, they might pray, they might fast, they might even go to Umrah, right? They may say Bismillah, Inshallah, Subhanallah every time they speak, but they are actively engaged in the killing, the slaughter of innocent people, right? Another group, they're spectators. They have the ability to do something, but they're just sitting back. Okay, so they will be questioned by Allah, depending on their ability. And then there's often a small group of people that are trying their best, raising their voice, organizing, doing whatever they can to push back against the zalims. So this is the pattern throughout history in all communities.
So on this small group, we pray that Allah gives tawfiq to Cage to be among them, inshallah. And if you could share us some first-hand experience, I'm sure there's numerous cases that you can share with us today, but something that really had an impact on you, affected you, and something that, subhanAllah, you saw the anguish, the worry, the pain that they went through, and maybe a success story from the work that you've done.
Yeah, it's actually, where do you start? There's so many different stories. There are, I can't really think of any single one to illustrate the point. But I will say that when the odds are stacked up against you so much in a kind of full comprehensive war that is attacking your mind, your psychology, your personality, your beliefs, and yes, your bodies. It's attacking your homes, your land, your culture, everything. In that environment, for the Muslims, the Muslim community as a whole, to still hold on to their deen, to not compromise their beliefs and values, to not submit to the oppressors, that is victory. When you talk about success stories, the success, we have to reframe what that means. As a Muslim, true success is remaining consistent and steadfast on the values that you believe in, even if you are threatened with material harm and loss. That is the main meaning of success. Success doesn't necessarily mean that we've had this many individuals that have bust their case in court. Okay, let's talk about the Guantanamo Bay brothers. All right, war on terror began with that prison being set up, by the land of Afghanistan being invaded by the Americans with a coalition of several other countries, and innocent people who had nothing to do with the events of September the 11th being bombed and killed en masse. Many, many brothers were picked up from across that region, and they were taken to a prison camp all the way other side of the world. How many of those brothers eventually came out? Alhamdulillah, majority of them, but they went through terrible ordeal, torture, isolation, separation from their families, being demonized in publicly, and all of that without even having any evidence presented against them. But crucially, how did they actually come out from that situation? There's not a single one of them that came out by going through the courts and busting case in the legal system. None of them came out like that. So if we start talking about success, straight from the onset, there'll be some Muslims that have a very, very weak understanding of what success looks like when you're in a scenario where there is a full spectrum war against the whole community. So I would like to hold them up as an example of people who have remained true to their deen and their principles, even through, long periods of torture. Notable examples that maybe you brothers can relate to because they're from Britain are two people I've mentioned. One is Muazzam Beg, the other one is Shakir Amir. These brothers, because they speak English, you can access their videos, their talks. They went through all of the horrors of Guantanamo Bay. Shakir spent 14 years there. He didn't see his children. One of them was born, even though, he never met his child. By the time he came back, they had already grown up. The world had completely changed. The Americans had put him through the torture that you hear about only in movies. He came out at the other end smiling. He came out at the other end still firm and strong in his belief as a Muslim. He came out at the other end still upholding justice. What does that mean? That means even if those American soldiers were one day going to be oppressed by somebody else, I will go and defend them. He didn't come out with hatred. He didn't come out with anger. So for me, that is success. That's very, very important for us to reflect on that. And I'll conclude by just saying, so these individuals, they had the biggest impact on me. When I sit with Brother Muazzam, for example, and you see, the personality that he has, the intelligence, the eloquence, it's the stuff that you might see from afar. But then to know the, suffering that he was put through and the many, many different things he could have done after coming out of prison. But then he chose to hold up that torch, to remain consistent and loyal to his brothers that he left behind, and to tell the world what is going on, and to do it in such an eloquent, persuasive way, to change public opinion completely about this prison camp. Shakir Ahmed is another person. Ali Al-Marri is another person. Babar Ahmed is another person. And then there's so many that are not very, very public, but we see, mothers who have had their children targeted by Prevent, and how they actually maintain their dignity and honor in that suffering. Often these mothers are isolated from the community because the community starts getting scared. If I associate with these people, maybe I'm going to get into trouble. So that's another level of suffering, but yet they maintain their dignity, they maintain their character. They go through that content with Allah's decree and fighting the oppressors in the process. There's, so many examples. So I don't want us to imagine that the fight for justice can be translated into success as measured by, wins that we secure in court cases or excellent media publicity in the Daily Mail or something like that. I don't want us to understand success like that. It will be wrong if we start looking at success like that. To conclude again, like I said, success is actually to know who you are, to have a clear moral and ethical framework, and then to uphold those, even though you have been oppressed, even though you've been threatened. If you come out of that ordeal, maintaining your consistency and integrity, that's victory. That is what is victory. All great victories are actually secured like that. Allahu Akbar.
So this is probably what ultimate divine justice is then, because even if you do not see it here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is on your side. Allah is the ultimate judge. وَإِلَى اللَّهِ تُرْجَعُ الْأُمُورُ. All affairs will return to Allah. So it could be that you see and you feel a part of it in this dunya, and then on the day of judgment it will be manifested there as well.
And just on that, yeah. Look at how Allah educated the Sahaba when they what we would call suffered defeat in Uhud. He told the Sahaba, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Don't be demoralized. Don't be worried. Don't be sad. You are indeed the most successful. You're the most superior if you're believers. So he was educating the Sahaba that you may encounter some defeat and loss in a materialistic kind of sense, so long as you don't lose heart, so long as you don't go back on your principles and your commitment, your convictions, you're still winners. Okay? Now, look at another scenario. You suffer some defeat, some big oppressors come and scare you and intimidate you, right? They threaten you that if you don't, work with us, we're going to put your name in the Daily Mail. Or if you don't actually give up your commitment to, let's say, your stance against same-sex marriage, we're gonna destroy your career. Okay. As soon as that happens, and then you start to crumble, right? Now you may secure your career. You may avoid that Daily Mail headline. You may find that you've got more friends, you've got more popularity, but actually you're defeated. Because you who you are as a Muslim, you were not able to preserve. You see? So that's again coming back to, I think secular people will find it extremely hard to grasp this concept. And the more that we stay in touch with the revelation, the more that we see the world through the prism of Iman, the more that this will make sense. We will be able to comprehend how so many prophets came to this earth and they suffered. Some of them, they were killed by their own followers. They were murdered by their own kind of community, not their own followers, but their own community. So what kind of success is that? Some prophets will be resurrected on the day of judgment, and they're only going to have a handful of people behind them following them. Not like droves and droves of people. They only have a handful. So you might start thinking, well, what did he do all his life? Like, what he didn't achieve anything. So Allah is educating us and telling us, no, success isn't determined like that. It's a difficult thing for us to swallow, but I think that the more we can make peace with that idea, the more we content within ourselves, we'll find an inner strength to continue the struggle for justice. Even if there's huge odds against us, we can still be victorious.
Yeah, I think the contentment is important for us Muslims. And I think the point on secular Muslims as well, because they've boxed Islam one place and everything else is basically their lens, their prism that you mentioned. This is why it will be difficult for people to understand, because they've already boxed Islam away. Once we see it through the Islamic perspective with the principles and are attached to the revelation, to the wahi, to the Quran, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we would see perhaps from this lens the divine justice being played out before us. Who would have expected, and I kind of think to myself, in the middle of this huge pandemic, right, coronavirus, that we've already, the nation states have already got a lot to deal with and handle, and on top of that you have protests on a cause that is reigniting fire from centuries ago. And it probably is divine justice being played, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding the oppressors and the colonialists that your sin is not forgotten, and your what you did is not forgotten. And even if the generations today might not have been present back then. Yeah. If I could ask you a bit more about obviously your personal case of the Schedule 7 as well. Is there anything you can update us on that? And obviously this is still ongoing. As someone who's from the kind of aviation background as well, and who flies, working for an airline quite regularly for different trips as well, it's always a fear. So I've been with colleagues embarrassed, I'll be honest, that I say to them, look, I'm going to be next. When they're laughing, no, you're with us, you're wearing a suit, you're going to go fine. No, I get stopped. So what is happening with this, if you could tell us?
Has it happened to you as well?
Yeah, so a personal story of mine, I was actually with my my lecturer from university, actually. We just came back. This is the most ironic thing, okay? We just came back from an aviation security conference. It was actually about the processes that airports do, okay? So we landed, I was with her, and I said to her, look, they're going to actually probably stop me, so you go ahead. And she was laughing at me, like, what are you talking about? And she actually came in and helped. She spoke to the immigration officer, look, he's with me. He's just come from a conference where we work for Coventry University. So yeah, this is still going, I think, isn't it? The powers of Schedule 7 is still in practice, right?
Yeah, that's right, Akhib. Yeah, I mean, for the brothers who don't know, yes, it is in a way, quite a common thing many Muslims actually experience this. As you've said, you're from the aviation industry, and even you're not safe. It's the kind of world that has been created where Muslims have been deliberately demonized, and the laws and the policies have then just kind of followed suit from there. So in my encounter with Schedule 7, it's the experience where whenever you're flying out of the UK, primarily when I'm coming back to the UK, there's additional stops at the border, questions, and then interrogation, search at the border, all allegedly, to try and find out what terrorism you're involved in. So this power was created to, how people have been convinced is, the power was created and passed in Parliament saying, we need this at the border in order to stop terrorists from coming in, right? But actually, it does nothing like that. What it does actually is stop people who look like Muslim and just interrogate them, harass them, take huge amounts of information from them. That's actually what it does. So on average, we're talking about easily 20,000 people each year that this happens to, every single year. If you go back a few years, you're talking about 60, 70, 80,000 people a year. So the Muslim community has actually become almost desensitized. Like, we got used to it, that most Muslims, when they go to airports, it's like almost a joke that we have banter between ourselves, isn't it? Like, everybody's looking at you, they're going to treat you differently, change your behavior, change your speech when you go to the desk. It's just psychologically, we've got used to it, right? So yeah, so that's been my experience, actually. Like, I've gone through, and it doesn't matter which country you go to, where you're coming from, like, it's always happening. In that particular case that you refer to, that happened in 2016. I was actually coming back from Doha, where you are, and I landed in at Heathrow Airport, and it started off with the usual questions under Schedule 7 powers, and then it just escalated into a situation where they were asking me to give up my laptop and my phone, and I was refusing. And they were saying, well, we have the power to take it off you, and if you don't give it, well, I said, look, you can take it, but I'm not going to give you my passwords. So they said, no, you've got to give us your passwords, otherwise we're going to arrest you. So my argument with them was, I'm not going to give up my passwords, because in my computer and in my phone, because everything is digital, everything's connected to the cloud and everything right nowadays, right? There's information there that doesn't belong to me. It belongs to torture survivors. It belongs to clients who come to Cage seeking assistance. So I'm not going to give that information to you until you give me the opportunity to go and speak to those people, get their consent. You see? So for me, it was a matter of amana, which means trust and being entrusted with confidential information. And I believe that it was morally and professionally completely wrong for me to breach that trust. So I said that to the police officers, like, I'm not going to allow, you can threaten me with what you like, but I can't breach that, So they went ahead and arrested me. And then that then led to later on, they charged me in court for this offense. And, I pleaded not guilty. And then eventually I was put on trial almost a year later. And at trial, I explained to the judge just the same things I explained to the police officer, that if I was a doctor, or I was even a banker, or a lawyer or something like that, or let's say I was a teacher or a researcher, and I had in my possession confidential information belonging to somebody else, I can't breach their trust and confidentiality. Like, every single professional ethic would be out of the window. I'd be in trouble with so many other obligations under employment law and other things. So this is unfair. This is wrong. And I am not a criminal, and I have done nothing wrong. And if it happens again tomorrow, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So, the judge simply was not brave enough take a stand. So she actually found me guilty. But again, alhamdulillah, you see, going back to our earlier point, it doesn't matter what the law says. If the law is unjust, yeah, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you support what is true and what is just. And therefore, I won. I believe I won the case. I would have lost the case if the judge threatened me, then I gave up my password. That would be. I didn't lose the case because I was found guilty, and then I got convicted under terrorism law. So again, it goes back to what does justice mean, and what does that commitment to justice?
Exactly. Jazakallah khair. We've got some questions coming in from the brothers and our audience. First one is, you mentioned that you were part of MYN in your early days, working for Islam since your youth. What advice would you give to young Muslims today? We've got some more questions as well. If you can keep that, some brief advices for the youth.
Can I start, or do you, okay?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think, Bismillah, I think, brothers, a few pieces of advice. Firstly, your youth is the most valuable time that you've got. It's the time that you will be most free in your entire life. Do not waste your time. Take your time seriously. Make sure that you plan every single day. Make sure that you have goals. Make sure that you take your time seriously. That's my first advice. Occupy yourself. That's my second advice. Occupy yourself with good things, productive things, constructive things. Learn, train, do exercise, do martial arts, do sports. Do not let yourself remain free, where you're just idle and you're sitting back and lazing around. Believe me, when you get a bit older, you're not going to look back and say, if only when I was 15 or 18 or 20, if only I watched more Netflix series, if only I was chilling more, and just relaxing and eating. You're not going to be thinking those things. You're going to be looking back and thinking the opposite. That when I was at the peak of my youth, I wish that I had done more. I wish I'd achieved more. I wish I didn't waste so much time. So those are 2 points. Thirdly, make sure that you actively keep yourself in contact with other like-minded brothers who are serious about their deen, who have a commitment to truth, to justice, to moral values. Keep in touch with them. Make sure that you regularly see them. Okay, don't keep away from good brothers for too long a period. And keep in touch doesn't just mean be in a WhatsApp group with them. It also means meeting, socializing, going and having some food together. Human beings need that. You need friendship, you need companionship. So in your youthful years, find the right people, spend time with them, okay? If you don't do that actively, what will happen is you're going to naturally find yourself getting into crowds that may not have a positive influence on your life. Fourthly, develop strong willpower. Find ways to develop your psychological ability to make a decision and to stick to a decision. This will make you a strong person. Young people, the culture we live in makes us believe that we can't, makes us sort of switch off and go into subconscious mode where you're just going with the flow. What we need from the next generation of Muslim youth is psychologically strong, spiritually strong people who have power over their nafs. And what that means is simply having the ability to make a decision and to stick to it. So cultivate this strength, cultivate this willpower. It's going to serve you for the rest of your life. Most of the battles that you're going to encounter are on a personal space. You have to win those battles every single morning that you wake up, all the way throughout the day. So cultivate that strength. And then finally, I'll say, spend your time, make a plan to learn the deen. What does that mean? Learning Quran, learning Hadith, minimum. And I'd add one more. Learn from the stories of the pious people who came before us. These 3 things are absolutely crucial to your education and development as a young person. Do not keep a distance between yourself and the revelation. Learn the Quran, just read it with meaning, read it with explanation, learn hadith, go and read 40 hadith, go and learn Riyadh al-Salihin, read from those books so that you can listen directly to the words of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Don't think that this is simple stuff. These are foundational, most valuable knowledge that you will gain in your youthful years. And then thirdly, I said, learn from the examples of people who came before us, righteous people, people who achieved great things in their life. Because they've passed away, you can see in them a model of those values that you and I believe in. So learn their stories.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. Thank you. Excellent advices there. So another question is, Muslims constantly see injustice around the world, in the East and in the West. They continue to feel disheartened. What are some of the positives that the Ummah can reflect upon from the current crisis we find our brothers and sisters facing around the world?
I think it is very natural to feel disheartened because you see suffering everywhere. We relate to those people. We have a spiritual, imani connection to those people. Hence, we feel the pain. If you said to me that we're looking around and it's like nothing to us, it's just some stuff about some faraway people, I'd be worried, right? It's evidence of a heart that is alive, a heart that feels pain and hurt when it sees members of the community elsewhere suffering pain and hurt. So that's the first thing. That's actually a positive thing. The second thing to say is that if we focus on that and connect with it purely from the point of empathy and emotional connection, then there could be a negative outcome if that's not guided down a particular route, constructive route. Okay, and what I mean by that is we don't want the shaitan to come and demoralize us because we see all the suffering, because it can be very overwhelming, right? There are horrific stuff that go on, and because of the advent of social media, it comes to us like in a flash, and you see it. You see like a child, and you can relate to that because your sibling or your child looks like that. You see a mother, and you can relate to that. So we have to realize that we're in a culture that is, if we don't protect ourselves a little bit, then it could be potentially very damaging. So what do? We try and we feel concern for all the Muslims everywhere who are suffering, but then we channel that concern into practical work that we can do here right now. Some of it will be not directly affecting and lifting the oppression from them. But remember, it's a moral commitment. You do what is within your ability and you focus on that. So I hope that in a general way.
Yes, thank you. I just want to get a couple of more questions in straight. So if you know you'll fail when stopping oppression in front of you, like a murder, for example, and you know you could be a victim yourself, is it better to still go ahead and try?
No, I think this is going to come down to the individual, Akhi. I think there'll be some people, they will say, I have to try because I cannot accept and live with the idea that that's happening right in front of me and I did nothing about it. Okay, so may Allah reward them, I say. There'll be other people who will feel, a natural kind of a risk. Okay, and I think nobody knows what they're going to do in the moment, right? But definitely, Allah praises the people who, are selfless and try and do the right thing, even if it means they may suffer in the process. Because the way to get around this is very simple. Flip roles. Put yourself in that shoe, and then ask the same question. Like if you were the one being attacked by somebody and you saw all these passers-by, what would you want them to do? And then the answer becomes clear.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so just as you were talking about Guantanamo, can you talk about how we can understand how droning is linked to domestic oppressive policies like Prevent?
Well, the connection is that it's based on a logic that is exactly the same logic. It's based on this idea, which to use a technical term, is called pre-crime. Right? It's this idea that we know that these people are going to become criminals or terrorists, as they like to use the word, which I reject. And therefore, we've got to take them out before they become something, a terrorist in the future. So PREVENT operates on the same basis, drone warfare operates on the same basis. There is absolutely no evidence that the people who are being assassinated by drone warfare are actually involved in crimes. But President Obama, every Tuesday morning, would be presented a list by his military generals, names, like dozens of names, all of them are Muslim names, obviously. And then he would authorize on that Tuesday morning which of those people need to be killed, right? But on what basis? On what evidence? No evidence. It's pre-crime. So then the drones would go and kill those people. Here in the UK, PREVENT operates on the same basis. That you obviously
with children as well, pre-crime with children.
5 and 6 year olds, Akhi, what kind of terrorism are they going to do? But it's all justified on that notion that this 5 or 6 year old has exhibited some words or some behaviors that in our calculation means that in the future, when he or she grows up, could become a terrorist. So we've got to intervene. We've got to get social services involved. We've got to separate the kid from the family and prevent him or her from becoming a terrorist. So that's the link. That's the problem with all of this.
Yeah. Just the last question then that came in from our YouTube channel as well. Just a quick shout out to our audience. Do follow us on our social media channels, MYN_UK on YouTube, obviously, and Instagram and Facebook as well. The last question is, how do we deal with insensitivity?
What does that mean? Sorry.
Okay, so I'm just literally reading the question. I think it's more in the sense that when we see all of these injustices and oppression, especially our own brothers and sisters in the Muslim world, like we said, may become desensitized. We're used to seeing all this flash, news headlines. How do we deal with that?
I think it's one of the peculiarities of this age, because there's information overload and we can see everything in a flash, and it's on video form as well. I think there is a level which is quite harmful to the human psychology, and shaitan can enter through that door. So how do we deal with it? Firstly, we don't want shaitan to enter through that door and take us into despair. Okay, so we've got to remind ourselves, everything is according to Allah's plan. Whatever injustice we see, it's through Allah's permission, out of his divine wisdom. Secondly, we remind ourselves that this world is not the end, right? Every single person that has been wronged, every single person, they will get their right back. And every wrongdoer will be taken to account on the Day of Judgment. So that belief system, our belief in the name of Allah, who is Al-Adil, should give us strength. So for us to cope with that. Thirdly, channel the energy. Get involved in organizations, activities, and projects that are practically doing something, right? Rather than sitting and watching and consuming, channel that energy, join a project or an initiative or a group, and contribute. So that's in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Akhi. Jazakallahu khair. This will bring us to the end of our episode today. Thank you to all our listeners and those who joined us. And thank you, our guest, Muhammad Rabbani, for quite an insightful discussion. And inshallah, we can have a future opportunity as well. So forgive us for any mistakes from our side. Barakallahu feek.
Allah accept from all of you.
Ameen. Assalamu alaikum. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.